Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Bob Greene speaking on August something like that, the 12th, 1986. We're in the backyard of the E.B. Taggart cottage, and we're going to talk today to some very lovely and charming people and the most handsome man in Pinewoods, John Bennett, and Callie Will. Now, my wife, Patricia McKibbin, will be asking questions if there happens to be a dull point in the conversation between Callie and John. So here they are.
I don't have a very good voice.
Mine sounds worse than that when it's recorded, because I think it sounds fine when I
When you
hear it recorded. I was wondering if we were going to be quizzed about the Wall Street Journal.
When did you come up?
The
Here.
first time
Uh-huh.
to Pinewoods, I think it was 1923. The Loomises rented, the Gilbert Loomises rented Aunt Louise's cottage for, I think, 2 years. And Stan and I were buddy pals because we lived in our family shared a house in Jackson. So Stan and I had always been buddy pals. And I visited the Gilbert Loomises up here, I think both in 23 and 24 when they rented Aunt Lou's cottage. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Stan was practically his brother, and Aunt Hattie was practically his. Well, she was his aunt.
She was. She was my mother's sister. That was our connection with Pinewoods. Gilbert Loomis was Alan Loomis's brother, and Mrs. Gilbert Loomis, Aunt Hattie, was mother's sister. So that was our connection with Pinewoods. But
I think I just visited around, must have been around 29.
yeah,
So you're earlier than I am.
well, Uncle Gilbert bought this cottage, our cottage, in 1925, and so I'm a little uncertain about the time before that, but I think it was 2 years that they rented the. It might have been more than that, but I think it was 2 years that they rented Aunt Louise's cottage. And I can remember swinging on the swing on the porch of that cottage.
I visited there, but I don't know what year it was.
Of course.
It was the year they made that movie with Uncle Gilbert.
Oh, that.
Was that 30?
Yeah.
That was after I graduated from college then. And
It was hard to tell.
I think Sandy was 6 years old, and he was,
And he was born in 1925.
oh, do you have all these statistics in your head now?
No.
From listening to people.
To say,
Yes.
I think it was after. When was it? Mother and Father bought the cottage from Uncle Gilbert when they were having so much depression trouble. And that was it, wasn't it, really?
Well, that wasn't until after Aunt Harriet died.
Wasn't it? I thought it was before then.
Yeah.
Anyway, Phil and I came up and visited for a week, as much as we could afford, which was very little.
You and Phil?
After we were married in '33, we came up here. I think we borrowed a car because we didn't have one. And Phil was really sold on the place. And then, we rented Aunt Lou's cottage for 10 years, I think it was. And we didn't want it for the whole season, and that's when the Cochrans came up for the other half of the season. And they got indoctrinated too. And Phil is one of the outside of Pinewoods characters who really loves the place without having to make those adjustments that some people seem to have to make. We had 10 years in Atlas Cottage, and finally the Loomises sold us that property to the east of them. He wanted Atlas property very badly, and I think he still resented the fact that we didn't have it. But Wynn said, oh, he didn't want it to be sold, and the Loomises said they would sell that area that we're in now. It's worked very well, though.
Oh, yes. You have a beautiful place.
Well, we like it.
Lots of room.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to need it all next week.
Are you?
Mm-hmm.
Who's coming next week?
Well, Phip and his whole family, and friends from the Philadelphia area. They lived there for 9 years. So they have a parent group that they've gotten together every year. They're going to come up here and camp, I think.
Camp in the village?
Yeah. We have a tent that they can put up. And I guess there's some room for some people. We'll just see how it works out. It's Phip's responsibility.
I
No.
wasn't here, but I remember hearing about it because Stan Loomis was involved in that, and his car got hung up on a stump, and the stump had a yellow jacket's nest in it. Were you? And
No.
there's a picture in our photograph album of Stan's face after that treasure hunt.
Oh, I remember that picture, not the incident. No, I was thinking about that on the way up here, that I would have been with Marg and Joy, and you mean the
Would have been a pirate.
pirate, yeah. Uh-huh. No, that's Elizabeth's age, and Betty and Esther.
Yeah, that was
Uh-huh.
a younger
That
Boa
was
Club.
the children of the they were the pirates of Stan's Pants.
I remember the pirates well.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Were you a member of that group?
No, I was
You were
She
older.
was too young.
too young.
Oh, you thought that was terrible.
I was terrified. I was me, maybe.
You knew where Stan's Pants came from, how they got to be the pirates of Stan's Pants.
I was told that, but I've forgotten.
Well, Stan and I had an uncle, Claude Haywood, who was in the Navy, had just joined the Navy, I think. And he drowned out at Clark's Lake in a sailboat accident. So all these Navy pants, whites, were available, and Aunt Harriet brought them up here thinking Stan and people like that could use them. But the girls got a hold of them, and Molly and Joy and all that gang. And they lived in them for years. Oh, and Tag. And of course they were the pirates. They had to be pirates so they could be the pirates of Stan's Pants.
I will say that I do remember getting quite sick and Aunt Harriet heating water in the tea kettle so that I could have a path. I think people have forgotten about the water supply, which was just the regular pump on the back porch,
A pump on our back porch.
and a path.
Yeah.
Our water supply was over there at the AM.
Well, that's what they had in the back of the Bennett cottage.
We had to take our baths at night.
It
Yeah,
was the Loomis cottage, though.
That's right.
yeah, it was the Loomis cottage at the time.
And before that, it was what? Whose house?
I think it was a plum.
Addie Plum. And I don't remember her at all.
Neither do I.
I don't,
Never met her.
if I presume I met her, but in those years when the Loomises were renting Aunt Liz Cottage, but I don't remember her at all. Oh, no.
No,
Hayde Plum was up here, and he had a sailboat, the Nymph. Stan and I learned to sail on the Nymph. We spent hours with Hayde Plum on that, because Stan was older than I, and Hayde was older than either of us. So, and he had this boat. I don't even know who the boat belonged to, but Hayde had the use of it, and the three of us did a lot of sailing on that boat.
most of them were catboats, weren't they?
No, I think the Nymph was a sloop, as I recall, but I don't. We've got pictures of it. I could find out, but
What boat would it have been that Father raced in?
I think that was the Spray, wasn't
I
it?
guess it was. I don't know. But anyway, Mother kept telling him, Rob, you shouldn't go out. You don't know how to sail. And he came in and just elated. He'd won. And I think he just had barely enough time to get off to Calcasas to take a train down to Indianapolis.
I don't believe I was around at that time. But I know he did. He rented a boat from somebody, and
Was that it?
I think it was from somebody in Cottage Grove. And there's a Spray carving on, the name Spray is carved on our pavilion with a date of about 1928 or so. I think that's when Father rented that, because it was never a boat that belonged to the cottage.
What was the boat that belonged to Loomis's?
That was the White Cap, and
There was another one, I think.
that was the year Uncle Gilbert bought the cottage. He got a lifeboat, a former lifeboat, converted it to a sailboat. Uncle Allen made the drawings for him, and the sail rig and all, and Uncle Gilbert, who was a very good craftsman, converted this to a sailboat, and then they brought it up here that year. There was a picture in the last Pinewoods of Morgan Stan sitting in Whitecap on the trailer when it first came up to Pinewoods. It was the first year they had the cottage, so Aunt Harriet loaded it up with blankets and sheets and all that kind of stuff. It was a very handy thing
More
to
space.
have, but it was the hull had never been designed as a sailboat. It was very tender. Uncle Rayner Field, who was a friend of Uncle Gilbert's, and quite heavy, stepped into it one day at the dock, and it rolled over with him almost immediately. But it was fun to sail, but it required attention every second because it was so tender, not having been designed as a sailboat. Well,
Probably sunk.
no, Pete and Catherine had it down in Elkhart for a while. I think maybe Stan had it out at Storm Lake, Iowa. But I'm sure Pete had it for a while on the river in Elkhart. Yeah, it left Higgins and Pinewoods. As far as I know, it was intact.
Well, it was a beautiful boat.
Still is, yeah.
Well, I've understood that's a Herreshoff boat.
The rainbow, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And
Oh.
Bill's mist was too.
Yeah, that's right.
It's in the Herreshoff Museum.
Bill's boat is?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's right, I did hear that. I remember the day that arrived. What excitement there was.
I think it was new when we made that movie.
Yeah, I think it was, that was probably its first or second year. But I was here I'm quite sure I was here when it arrived. There was some problem about getting, it had a keel and a centerboard. And there's some problem about getting
Well, he had to anchor it way out all the time.
Yeah. There's some problem about getting the centerboard in. But I wasn't around when the movie was made. It was made with my camera, but I wasn't around.
I can remember that camera.
I still have it.
You do?
Yeah.
Pretty soon it'll be valuable as an antique.
Well, I tried selling it as an antique, and
No bidders.
it didn't sell. Yeah, it was a one.
Focus, didn't you?
Well, you wound it up. It was a spring-driven camera, but I had gotten real gung-ho about photography in about 1928. Bought that camera. Never had money enough to buy film for it very much.
The 16 millimeter doesn't convert very well.
No.
Phil was very disappointed in his. I mean, last summer they had our Mexican pictures and our around the world pictures and so forth, and they weren't good.
Were they blurry?
Blurry, and I don't know, the framing wasn't right, and the color wasn't as good as it should have been. That's a little bit like Steve Hart
Yeah.
and Susie. He just got married, and they got married in the Mairie, I think. And then we went to the Côte d'Azur, and Susie went along with them. So life is different now, in a lot of ways.
Well, my memory isn't very good.
Sail, he said.
Did you have a gang?
The thing
Sort
I
of.
remember in the way of a gang was that when I was a teenager, it seemed to me that every night after dinner, there was a game of some kind, Run Sheep Run, or you probably remember those, don't you, Patty? Beckon, yeah. All alley outs in free of some kind.
I taught my children back and what did they do but convert it into an indoor game? Yeah. Oh.
But that seemed to be as regular as the collection of the kids on the front steps of the dining hall is now. The other thing I remember about either it was probably 24. But, my grandfather bought his first car in 1923, I believe, and it was enough of an event that there was a headline on the second section of the Sunday paper, F.D. Bennett buys a car. And the reason was that he lived about a half mile from downtown, and he kept horses, and so the horses, the F.D. Bennett horses and carriage got to be a real sight by the early 20s, you know, going up and down Wildwood Avenue and Main Street. But he bought a Franklin finally, and I think it was 1923. And in 24 he drove up here. They had
Long drive.
a place in Topnaby, and they drove up that year. I think it was a 3-day trip, or at least they spent 2 nights on the road. And they planned to stop here for lunch. They'd spent the night in Clare. They were going to stop here for lunch, so Stan and I went out to where the blinker light is now to meet them. And of course, we didn't have much to do. We went out a lot sooner than they were expected, so we were hanging around there. And finally Stan said, well, the next car that comes over the hill is going to be Grandma and Grandpa. He called them that, even though they were my grandparents. And sure enough, the next car over the hill was Grandma and Grandpa, but it was half an hour before the next car came over that hill. And that was then the only road up the center of the state. There wasn't any other road.
It was really a plains road almost, wasn't it?
Well, it was, by that time it was a
Gravel.
good gravel road. But but a half an hour between cars. And I think that was 24, because we were still in Atlas Cottage, and at least I have a distinct recollection of our deciding, you know, it's one of those things that sticks in my memory where I forget everything else, of leaving from Atlas Cottage to walk out to the intersection.
That's a pretty good walk in itself.
Yeah, but we probably didn't have anything else to do that morning.
Probably got a ride back.
Oh yeah, we knew we'd get a ride back. Yeah. But travel was different then. Yeah, that, well, I put it together from a kit. But the best boat that was assembled around here was, I had nothing to do with. Stan and Henny, what was Henny's?
You must have known Henny.
But she and Stan put 2 sails on 2 masts and maybe 3 sails on a rowboat, just an old flat-bottomed rowboat they found someplace. Sails weren't very big, of course. Maybe the masts were maybe 6-8 feet tall, and they called it the sails rowback for obvious reasons. It would only go downwind. I think we've used up enough of your tape. I think our back cue is best.
Well, thank you for coming.
Goodbye.
Bye. Bye, Callie. Bye. Okay. See you later.